What if the sky above us was once not blue at all, but something stranger, an iron-stained veil, a ceiling coloured with dust and steam? Imagine looking up 3 billion years ago, when the dome of the heavens carried no familiar hues, no soft windows of clarity, but instead a haze of ash and gas, pressing the horizon into a world that felt more enclosed, more secret. We think of skies as eternal, oceans as fixed, landscapes as permanent, but nothing we take for granted has always been this way. For most of Earth's history, the air itself would have felt alien to us, a presence closer to poison than to breath. In that time, the sun shone weaker, yet the earth below was hotter, wrapped in greenhouse gases thick enough to blur the line of vision. The land that did exist was volcanic, black and jagged, bleeding into oceans that frothed with iron. If we had walked there, our eyes would not recognize the color of water, our lungs would not welcome the air, our ears would not hear the same silence. And yet, it was a silence rich with promise, a stillness holding the seeds of all futures to come. The very molecules that would one day weave themselves into rivers, forests, and cities were scattered in that heavy sky, drifting and colliding, waiting for chance encounters. Perhaps they did not glitter or shine. Perhaps they only lingered, unnoticed, in vapor and shadow. What is it to picture a world before blue, before green, before the familiar palette of life? Is it possible that the earliest Earth had a beauty not defined by the familiar, but by its strangeness, by its refusal to resemble anything we now know? And the question lingers, how does a planet remember such a past? There are no photographs, no living things who can speak of it. There are only stones, crystals, tiny isotopes embedded in layers of rock. These are Earth's journals, pages almost erased by time, but not completely. When geologists read the ratios of sulfur and iron in ancient deposits, they are listening to a sky that once was thick and red, that once draped itself around a younger world like a cloak. Every trace, every number, every trapped atom is evidence of a sky we will never stand beneath, and yet it speaks through silence. To close your eyes and imagine that sky is to imagine breathing within another dream, standing on the edge of an ocean no human has ever seen. The air stings with methane. The light bends in fevered tones. The ground is unstable underfoot. We would not survive here, yet in these impossible conditions, survival itself was being rehearsed. Microbes, infinitesimal and unseen, were building the first patterns that would eventually shape the oxygen we now breathe. How delicate it feels to picture our existence depending on something so small in a world that had no sky of blue. Entropy moves slowly, but it moves without pause. The atmosphere we know today was sculpted by billions of years of loss, of chemical forgetting, of silence, transforming one form into another. This is what time does. It erases almost everything, but never entirely. It leaves just enough for us to ask questions in the dark. Could the colours of that lost sky still linger somewhere, seen only through instruments that read the past embedded in minerals? Could echoes of that haze still be flowing through us now, in the iron carried in our blood? What if colour itself is a kind of memory, that the blueness of today's sky is not merely scattering of light, but a record of Earth's long striving toward balance? If so, every time we lift our eyes upward, we are not only seeing a sky, but a story written against the vault of time, a reminder that what seems constant has been rewritten uncountable times, and will be again. Sometimes it is easier to believe in permanence, to imagine that the world as we see it now was always waiting for us. But the truth is, quieter, more humbling. Our sky is only the latest draft of many. Before it came skies of fire, skies of haze, skies of silence, and even now the atmosphere continues to shift in slow, imperceptible ways. The story is not over. It never will be. And so we return to the question, what is it like to live under skies that do not resemble our own? Could such an existence change the way we think, the way we feel, the way memory itself unfolds across generations? We dream now beneath a sky of blue, but billions of years ago, Earth itself dreamed under another canvas, strange, hidden, unknowable. The colours of that dream may never return, but they are woven invisibly into the silence around us, waiting in stone, in dust, in every breath we take. And yet, if even the sky can vanish and be replaced, if even something as vast as the heavens can change its very skin, what else might we have already forgotten from those earliest days? And yet, if even the sky itself can vanish and wear a different face, what of the ground beneath our feet? The land, too, was once unrecognizable. 3 billion years ago, continents as we know them had not fully risen. and the earth was still shaping its bones. Vast sheets of basalt spread endlessly, black and glistening with newborn heat, cracked by eruptions that never seemed to cease. There were no mountains carved by ice, no valleys softened by rain. The earth's crust was fragile, restless, always breaking open and pouring itself back into the sea. Imagine standing there, though of course we could not have. The air was heavy and unkind to breath, and yet the vision of it lingers, all around. Fire and water fought quietly for space. Volcanoes rose and collapsed in the same breath, spilling molten rivers into oceans rich with boiling minerals. Each eruption reshaped the horizon. Each rumble redrew the line between land and sea. Land was not yet permanent. It was an experiment, endlessly revised, a stage trying to assemble itself before any actors arrived. The cradle of stone was not silent either. Beneath the surface, tectonic plates, thin and unstable, slid and collided in slow conversation. Subduction zones dragged the seafloor down into the mantle, recycling what had just been created, folding rock into rock, secret upon secret, layering memory in molten handwriting. To us it seems violent, but to the earth it was the rhythm of birth. Heat cooling, stone rising, continents taking their first cautious steps into existence. And yet, in that instability, there was order. Patterns formed in lava flows. Crystals grew in cooling magma, each carrying within them the isotope trails of their birth. The rocks became archives, still holding whispers of the gases that filled that early atmosphere, still whispering of the oceans that spread like unbroken mirrors under strange-colored skies. To touch one of these ancient stones now is to place a hand upon time itself, to feel how patiently Earth has been carrying its own forgotten past. Perhaps there is something almost tender in this image, that life as we know it would only be possible because the ground was not steady, without the heat that split land into fragments, without the minerals freed by eruptions and carried across infant seas. The chemistry of biology may never have had its chance. The violent landscapes were not obstacles, they were invitations, not because they made Earth comfortable, but because they made it restless, always moving, always mixing, always creating new possibilities where none had been before. And so we return to wonder, what does it mean for life itself to be born from instability, from fire, from collapse? Could it be that everything we now call home, trees, rivers, creatures, memories, are simply the long echoes of a planet that never stopped changing its form? Maybe permanence has always been an illusion, and the comfort we feel in standing on solid ground is only borrowed from an Earth that refuses to be still. Close your eyes and hear it, the low thunder of magma cooling beneath thin crust, the hiss of steam rising where fire meets ocean, the heartbeat of a planet still young. The world swayed then, both fragile and immense, holding within its chaos the outline of every future continent, every mountain range, every coastline we would come to know. And what we call stability today is nothing more than the slowed version of that same dance. The continents still move. The stone still remembers. The fire beneath has not gone out. The cradle of stone and fire was not a place to live, but it was a place for beginnings. It was the architecture of possibility, laying a foundation we now walk on without ever thinking of its origin. And if skies can vanish, and lands can rebuild themselves again and again, then how much of Earth's story has already been erased, written over not by carelessness, but by the endless necessity of change? And yet, if stone itself can be melted and remade, if continents can vanish like breath and return in new forms, what of the oceans that drowned them, reshaped them, and whispered against their edges? And yet, if stone itself could be broken and remade, reshaped by fire and pressure, what of the waters that filled the world around it? For in those days, the oceans were not the blue mirrors we know today. They were thick with metals, veiled in minerals, darkened by iron that stained the tides in hues of red and brown. To stand at their edge, if it were possible, would be to watch a sea without clarity, a vast basin of shadowed colours, glowing faintly in the dim light of a weaker sun. These oceans were heavy, not only with salt, but with potential. Every tide carried whispers of chemistry that would one day become breath and bone and thought. Minerals swirled endlessly, colliding, dissolving, recombining. It was not yet life, not yet memory, but it was preparation, a quiet rehearsal played upon a stage of water and stone. To us, it is almost unimaginable. Waves that did not lap gently in transparency, but rolled with density, thick as ink, burdened with restless possibility. And still, there was movement. Currents wandered in the depths, carrying plumes from volcanic vents, clouds of heat and metal swirling through black eternity. In these obscure waters, time stretched and slowed. Daylight did not pierce far, only shadows swam across the surface. Yet, here was the real beginning. Invisible forms stirred, microscopic and ancient, building the first faint bridges between chemistry and biology. They asked nothing of the world but a place to drift, to consume, to divide, and in their drifting, they began the long work of changing everything. Perhaps they did not know what they were creating, or perhaps creation never needs to know itself. Cyanobacteria, small beyond sight, began weaving oxygen, releasing it like threads of invisible light into an atmosphere that was not yet ready for it. Slowly, invisibly, they stitched a future into the waters they filled. The oceans, tinted by iron, began to record this great transformation in stone. Bands of iron, oxidized and sunk to the seabed, left behind layers still visible today, striped archives of early breath, preserved in silence. To trace a finger along one of these ancient banded rocks today is to trace the boundary between worlds, between an ocean that suffocated and an ocean that created. Such stones are not mere geology, they are fossils of oceans themselves. They are echoes of green shadows, reminders that water need not be clear to give rise to life. And doesn't that idea soften us? That life could begin not in clarity, not in light, not in beauty as we would define it, but in murk, in density, in the silence of unseen corners. The first gardens of Earth were not forests or plains, but mats of microbes clinging to rock, colouring the shorelines in subtle films of green. They were quiet, patient, almost invisible, yet without them, there would be no forests, no rivers, no us. Life so often begins in shadow. Maybe memory itself is born there too. If we could stand on that shore and lower a hand into those waters, what would it feel like? A thickness perhaps, like touching not just water but an archive. Layers of dissolved history pressing against the skin. What would it sound like? Not the familiar rhythm of waves, but a muffled stillness, broken only by the hiss of boiling plumes. And what would it smell like? The tang of metals, the sting of sulfur, scents both harsh and elemental, yet filled with the origin of life. The oceans of 3 billion years ago were not hospitable, but they were generous. They held the ingredients, the energy, the mystery, and above all, the patience for what was to come. No creature could have known it then. No consciousness yet existed to ask the question, that these seas were already writing the script for futures beyond counting. And yet, if such abundance could be hidden within oceans of shadow, if the most vital beginnings could stir where no light reached, then what other beginnings might the earth have hidden in places still too dark for us to see? And yet, if such abundance could be hidden within oceans of shadow, if the first beginnings could stir where no light touched, then what of the air that stretched above those waters? For in that age, to breathe was not to live as we know it now. The atmosphere was a weight, thick with carbon dioxide, swells of methane, veils of nitrogen, threads of ammonia. To us, it would be poison. To the planet, it was possibility. The very air was a canvas still empty, waiting for the first strokes of change. Breath is what defines so much of life for us. It is rhythm, pulse, continuity, yet for billions of years, Earth carried no breath that lungs could use. And still, even then, some of the smallest organisms hidden in shallow waters spread across coastlines, clinging to minerals and light, were beginning a long and invisible labor. They learned to transform sunlight into energy, to split water, to release oxygen, one bubble at a time, breath before breath. This gift grew slowly, almost imperceptibly, like whispers pooling into silence too vast to notice. At first, oxygen was not welcome. It was corrosive, destructive, it stained metals, it suffocated older forms of life that had flourished in its absence. For countless ages, the oxygen released by microbes did not rise into the air. Every atom of it was swallowed by iron in the oceans, locked away in stone, hidden beneath sediment. The planet resisted change, consuming every new gift in endless cycles, and yet, persistence is patient. Oxygen continued to flow, small and unseen, again and again, until finally, the rocks themselves were saturated. The oceans could hold no more. The sky had to change. Imagine it. The slow arrival of a new breath, filling what had never been filled. For the first time in 3 billion years, the atmosphere shifted towards something we might almost recognize. The blue sky of today had its seed in that invisible exhalation. We stand under it now, without a thought that every breath we take is borrowed from the patience of ancient microbes, from their labor across eons, building an atmosphere they would never see in its fullness. There is something humbling in this thought that breath, which feels the most personal, the most present, is not truly ours. It is inheritance. It is the memory of oceans, written into the air, carried seamlessly into our lungs. Perhaps that is why a deep inhale fills us with calm, because we are not merely breathing air, but history, silence, persistence, a continuity so deep we can scarcely name it. Could it be that Earth itself began to dream when breath filled its sky? For to breathe is to move in rhythm, to rise and fall, to carry cycles of renewal. Maybe the planet's first great dream was of lungs yet unborn, of forests still far beyond the horizon, of creatures waking into the world through this shared exchange between body and atmosphere. And maybe every breath we exhale is a quiet reminder that we live inside that same dreaming. Breath before breath. It is also a metaphor for memory itself, something waiting, unseen, beneath the surface. Something unnoticed until the moment it fills an entire sky, demanding permanence. Memory too often lies in silence, hidden in stone, in isotope, in shadow, and then, suddenly it emerges, reshaping how all futures are imagined. Just as oxygen remade the earth, memory remakes the self, filling the present with the unseen weight of the past. And yet, how much of that earliest breath has been forgotten? How many gases, how many subtle patterns in the air, have vanished without leaving tally or stone? We can read only fragments now, ratios carved into crystals, faint whispers locked inside minerals billions of years old. In these traces we glimpse a sky we could not breathe, but that did breathe for us, long before we arrived. And so the question remains, if the very air can remember, if every breath is a fragment of forgotten oceans, then what of the fossils that never were, the invisible imprints of worlds erased before they could ever be recorded? And so the question remains, if the very air can remember, if every breath is a fragment of forgotten oceans, then what of the fossils that never were, the creatures and moments erased before stone ever had the chance to hold them? When we picture fossils, we imagine bones pressed into rock, shells turned to stone, forests etched into coal, but 3 billion years ago, there were no bones, no shells, no forests. The world was soft, fluid, mutable. Life existed, but it left behind no skeletons, no hard record to endure. Entire epochs may have unfolded in silence, never leaving a trace we can read. In this lost time, the archives of Earth are not carved in the shapes of bodies but within the subtle language of chemistry. Instead of vertebrae and teeth, we inherit the memory of isotopes, ratios of carbon, sulfur, and iron, that whisper of what once moved across oceans too thick with metal to show themselves. We lean in close to these tiniest of messengers, knowing they are all that survives of vast living kingdoms whose names we will never know. It is memory at its thinnest, like holding fog in the palm of a hand. There is both sorrow and wonder in this realization. Sorrow because so much is gone without witness, with no silhouettes to guide imagination. Wonder because, despite their silence, the rocks still contain the faintest breath of vanished lives, not in outlines sharp enough to display in glass cases, but in absences, in chemical echoes, in patterns that feel like pauses in the Earth's story. Fossils that never were still find ways to be heard, if only in the static of deep time. Imagine tracing your fingers across the surface of ancient stone, running your hand along a banded layer of iron. What you touch is not only geology but memory, the remains of oxygen breathed, consumed, released by lives too small to see. They left no shells, yet they remain everywhere. Every stone in those layers is their residue, their unmarked gravestone, their testimony. The world is filled with fossils we cannot hold, fossils we must imagine into being. Entropy has been the great archivist here. It erodes, it reshapes, it erases, but always it leaves something. Not because it intends to, but because the act of decay creates its own kind of record. Loss writes history in another alphabet. Sometimes the alphabet of absence. Could it be that much of Earth's story can only ever be known this way? Not by what is there but by what is missing. Microbial mats dissolved. Entire colonies vanished in silence. Countless generations rose and fell, but their legacies dissolved back into the waters without a single mark upon the stone. To imagine these creatures is like imagining dreams that evaporate upon waking. They were real, they shaped oceans, they altered skies, and yet we know them only as shadows, written between the lines of the chapters that remain. When we search for fossils that never were, We are searching not just through rock, but through absence itself. We are leafing through a book in which most of the pages have been torn out, yet the faint handwriting of what pressed against them has left a trace. Even shadows have texture. Even silence has shape. And perhaps this is why the study of deep time feels so much like philosophy. For every stone that speaks, 1,000 do not. For every fossil we can hold, countless others escape us completely. Are we studying the earth? Or are we simply learning how to listen to what cannot be said? Perhaps both. Memory in this form is not a preserved skeleton. It is a softened echo, more fragile but no less profound. Could it be that we ourselves are also fossils that never were? That much of our own existence will leave no trace, no mark for the distant future to find. Entire lives, cultures, stories may vanish as though they never existed, remembered only in the quiet chemistry of sediment laid down invisibly in our passing. What we think of as permanence, our monuments, our cities, may be as soft and forgotten as those earliest microbial mats, gone without skeletons, gone without testimony. The thought does not need to darken us. Instead, it invites humility. It reminds us that even without stone-bound fossils, the work of life is not wasted. The oxygen in our lungs, the carbon in our bones, the iron flowing through our veins, all of it was built upon uncountable generations whose bodies left nothing. They are remembered, not in their form, but in us. Perhaps this is the deeper kind of fossil, living, not buried. And yet, if so much can vanish without leaving form, if entire kingdoms can dissolve into air and water without a trace, what else has slipped beyond the reach of stone? What other chapters of time were written, and then erased before they even had a chance to stay? And yet, if entire kingdoms could vanish before stone could enshrine them, what of the continents themselves, the grandest pages of Earth's story? Even land was not guaranteed in those distant ages. For 3 billion years ago, the continents we walk upon were whispers, fragments, beginnings. They were not the solid frames we imagine as endless. They were rafts of stone, thin and trembling, drifting in oceans that swallowed their edges again and again. The silence of continents was the silence of incompletion. Where we expect vast ranges and enduring mountains, the Earth offered only scattered landforms, small islands of volcanic rock, newly cooled, cracked and unsettled. They were newborn, fragile, and brief. Each tried to rise, but the ocean pulled downward, burying them in the mantle, remaking them again and again. Land was temporary then, still struggling to declare itself. Imagine the first outlines of continents, floating like questions on the surface of the world. No forests spread across them. No rivers carved them. No footsteps pressed into their soil. They were almost empty thoughts of land, not yet places we could recognize as home. Some endured for a time, colliding softly, perhaps merging into micro-continents. But even their unions dissolved in silence, consumed by heat below. The stability we now trust beneath our feet had not yet arrived. And yet, even in such fragility, the continents carried significance. They framed shallow waters, edges where tides could leave behind minerals, coasts where microbial mats might cling. They created borders between ocean and sky, liminal places where chemistry met geography, where possibility deepened. These drifting fragments may have seemed mute in their silence, but they were hosts to quiet revolutions happening in their shallows, where life leaned against stone for the first time. Geology tells us these proto-continents arose from processes still familiar: tectonic movements, volcanic outpourings, and layers of crust thickening over time. But what they represented was something we feel as much as know: the Earth taking its first cautious breath on land, preparing a stage for futures not yet written. The silence was not emptiness. It was waiting. When we imagine the continents of today, Africa vast with deserts, Asia banded with mountains, Antarctica sealed in ice, it is almost impossible to compare them to these small beginnings. And yet every modern landscape is built on echoes of these early fragments. Buried deep, hidden in the heart of ancient cratons, scientists find remnants of the rocks that once floated in that primeval ocean. They are Earth's earliest attempts at permanence, carried in stone, older than 3 billion years. It is easy to forget that continents themselves have a memory, written not in fossils, but in minerals, isotopes, and scars of tectonic collisions. To walk upon an old rock is to walk upon silence, upon a fragment of Earth's earliest dreams. How often do we think about this? When our feet touch ground, how often do we notice that land itself is fleeting, as subject to change as the sky, as the oceans, as the creatures upon it? Perhaps that is what the silence of continents means, not absence, but humility. The land we walk upon holds the stillness of having risen and been erased countless times before. Every coastline is provisional. Every mountain is temporary. Every plain is a pause, not an ending. Even now, continents slide across the mantle at the slow pace of fingernails growing, drifting on plates that do not stop moving. The silence is not that they do nothing, but that they move in voices too deep for us to hear. And yet, if continents themselves are restless, if the very ground beneath us is never still, then how can we ever believe in permanence? What other silences has Earth been carrying, hidden in this ceaseless drift of stone? And yet, if continents themselves are restless, if land can rise only to be swallowed again, then what of the air that enveloped those fragile rafts of stone? Above the silence of drifting continents stretched a sky like no sky we know, a greenhouse world, heavy and thick, shrouded in gases that trapped the planet in a fevered dream. The sun shone weaker then, radiating only a fraction of the warmth it does today, and yet paradoxically, Earth burned hotter, wrapped in veils that refused to let its heat escape. Picture it, an atmosphere rich in carbon dioxide, swollen with methane, stirred with ammonia. The gases bent light differently, refracted the sun in strange tones. The familiar clarity of blue was not yet possible. Skies may have glowed in rusted shades, a shadowed copper dome pressing down on the waters. Even day carried something of dusk. To stand on those shores, if standing had been possible, would have meant being held beneath not a canopy of light, but a roof of weight, thick as silence. This greenhouse shroud was not accident, but necessity. Had the atmosphere not trapped heat so efficiently, the weaker sun might have left Earth frozen, its oceans locked away before life ever took hold. Instead, methane and carbon ensured a fragile warmth, a balance between suffocation and fertility. It was a dangerous equilibrium, yet it made possible the delicate beginnings of all futures. Could it be that life was cradled not in comfort, but in the margins of danger, held within a sky that threatened to smother it? And still, the atmosphere did not remain unchanged. Each exhalation of microbes, each breath of oxygen, each eruption of volcanic gases, tilted the balance. Carbon pulled into stone and released again, methane blooming from microbial mats, then seeping away. Atmosphere has always been in flux, always writing and rewriting its own story. What we breathe today is a single verse in an endless poem recited by oceans, forests, fires and stones. In that greenhouse world, storms must have brewed differently, with so many gases weighing the air. Raindrops likely fell heavy, carrying acid as they struck the infant continents. Lightning whipped across skies that had never known trees or fields to illuminate, striking bare stone, igniting waters thick with minerals. Fire was not yet a common language, oxygen had not reached its fullness, but electrical storms must have painted the world in momentary flashes, brief harbingers of a drama still to come. There is wonder in imagining how different the world would have felt beneath such skies. If color was altered, then the very rhythm of perception would have been altered too. Perhaps dawn broke not in pale clarity, but in copper glow. Perhaps shadows stretched deeper, heavier, carrying a different kind of presence. The air itself was presence, not invisible, as it feels to us now, but visible, tangible, pressing down. Each breath would have had taste, each wind thickness. This was not the quiet partner of living we feel today, it was the dominant actor of the stage. We call it the greenhouse effect, a phrase that sounds simple, even domestic, a house of green, a shelter. But this was no shelter as we would imagine it. No glass enclosure meant for calm growth. It was a theatre of risk, a delicate balance built on chance. If gases had tipped too far one way, oceans might have boiled into steam. If they had shifted the other, Earth might have frozen in silence. Instead, improbably, life was threaded between extremes, walking a line so fine we can scarcely comprehend its survival. And perhaps this is the greatest silence of all, that we breathe so easily now, without hearing the long struggle that preceded us, without knowing how easily it might have gone another way. We forget that the atmosphere we trust is only a temporary arrangement, shaped by cycles we cannot see, vulnerable to balance subtle shifts. What if the future sky, too, changes color? What if epochs yet unborn inherit not blue, but some other hue woven by chemical chance? Would they recognize what we call normal? Or would they stand beneath entirely different heavens, barely able to imagine the world that once held us? And yet, if even the air can shift its nature, If the sky itself can be rewritten so thoroughly, then what of the first architects who shaped it? The invisible builders of breath, who raised monuments not of stone, but of living rock. And yet, if even the air could shift its balance, if the sky itself could be rewritten, then what of the first architects who helped draw its new face? They were not creatures of scale or grandeur. They were not forests or herds or any form we might recognize. They were small, microscopic, invisible without aid. And yet, their work transformed the planet more than any empire ever would. Along shallow coastlines, in tidal pools, across mineral shelves, where the greenhouse seas touched fragile continents, the first cities began to appear, cities not of stone laid by human hands, but of rock slowly woven by microbial life. These were stromatolites, layered mounds built by mats of cyanobacteria. To the unknowing eye, they were nothing more than lumps of limestone rising just above the water's surface. Silent, plain, unadorned, but their architecture was deliberate. Each layer was life capturing sunlight, binding sediments, exhaling oxygen. Layer upon layer, cycle upon cycle, they built living monuments that grew not upward like towers but outward like breathing memory. Over time, the mats rose into bulbous formations, stone cities in miniature, sprawling in shallow seas for miles. Imagine standing on a shore 3 billion years ago, when nothing walked on land, when no plant softened the ground. Your gaze would find forests missing, silence unbroken, save for the hiss of tide. And yet beneath the water's skin, these microbial cities thrived, millions of unseen citizens working together, catching photons in open light, feeding on minerals, layering themselves into monuments that would one day fossilize. They did not choose permanence, and yet they made it. There is a deeper wonder in knowing these cities still exist. In certain corners of our present Earth, remote bays in Australia, shallow lagoons of the Bahamas, stromatolites still grow, quiet copies of their ancient ancestors. They are windows, living windows, into the deep past, carrying on a tradition older than forests, older than shells, older than the very mountains beneath them. To see them now is to see continuity undisturbed, a world where time has refused to move forward, a world caught in stillness, yet still alive. And what does this continuity whisper? It suggests that the first breath of order, the first architecture born of life, did not strive toward complexity at once. It grew slowly, patiently, unseen. Cities rose not for consciousness, not for will, but because billions of tiny beings followed their rhythm, repeating themselves into shape. What does it mean that the Earth's first monuments were not built to be remembered, and yet they endure longer than almost all we will ever build? Geological evidence tells us these stromatolitic cities released immeasurable amounts of oxygen. For them it was byproduct, excess, a trace of energy transformed. But for Earth, it was revolution. The atmosphere, once thick with suffocating gases, began to shift irreversibly toward the oxygen-rich sky we depend on now. Every exhalation, every layer, was a contribution. Billions of invisible citizens writing futures with no knowledge of their own importance. It was the largest construction project in history, and its engineers were smaller than dust. Could it be that memory itself works like this? That the greatest archives we have are not deliberately written, but accidentally created, layer by layer through repeated rhythm? Just as stromatolites accumulated into monuments that outlasted eons, perhaps our own lives become memory in patterns we never notice. Habits, breaths, fragments left behind as echoes after us. Architecture of existence, built in silence, built without intent, yet enduring in ways we cannot predict. There is humility in this thought, that life's first cities had no roads, no speech, no flag, and yet what they created remains visible after billions of years. Our own towers and streets, our glowing metropolises, may crumble faster than those microbial domes. Perhaps endurance is not found in striving for greatness, but in repetition, in persistence, in the patient weight of small things layered over time. Walk the fossilized shorelines where stromatolites remain, and you place your feet against the world's earliest memory. Each step lands on histories so ancient they belong not to us, not even to the creatures we know, but to beings who had no face, no sound, no identity beyond the collective. They remind us that greatness can bloom without notice, that transformation does not announce itself loudly, but accumulates in silence. And yet, if the Earth's first cities were made of microbes layering stone into monuments, what other cradles of heat and pressure, hidden deep below the oceans, were also reshaping life in silence? sculpting beginnings in places untouched by light. And yet, if the first cities of life were built in the open light of shallow seas, layering oxygen into stone, then what of the places where light could never reach at all? For far beneath the waves, at the dark seams of the ocean floor, the planet revealed another kind of city, one not of sunlight and air, but of fire hidden under water. Along cracks in the mantle, black chimneys breathed heat into the silence. They were not ruins, they were cradles. Imagine drifting there in the abyss, where no daylight ever falls, where pressure crushes with a weight we can scarcely imagine. Amid this endless night, hydrothermal vents rising from fissures in the earth release water superheated with minerals, billowing into vast clouds of black smoke, sulfides, metals, elements fresh from the mantle, gifts drawn from the planet's body and poured into the sea. What feels violent to us was nourishment to the tiniest forms of life. Here, in the strangest of gardens, life may have first taken root. Chemistry met chemistry under the press of darkness, and simple molecules stumbled into complexity. Proteins, membranes, the blueprints of cells, all rehearsed in the volcanic dark. Could it be that life's origin was not in sunlight at all, but in these black cauldrons where the earth itself exhaled? Scientists still debate, but the possibility lingers. And isn't it humbling that all forests, rivers, songs, and faces might descend from the breath of rocks in water too deep for us to bear? These vents formed towers, mineral chimneys that rose like cathedrals into the dark. Entire ecosystems clung to their sides. Bacteria, archaea, strange forms feeding not on light, but on heat and chemistry. A life that learned to eat stone, to drink sulfur, to convert energy, not from the sun, but from the earth itself. Even today, vent fields remain alive, supporting communities unlike anywhere else, reminding us that other pathways to survival have always existed. Perhaps this is the true wonder, that life was not fragile, not bound to a single recipe, but opportunistic, hungry, adaptive. In every crack, in every vent, in every whisper of heat, it found a way. It is the same force that rose into stromatolites, the same persistence layering itself into stone under a copper sky. Life listens for openings. When the earth breathes, life rushes to breathe with it. If memory can be held in fossils, if history can be read in isotopes, then these vents tell a different kind of story, not etched in permanence but alive in continuity. Each plume rising from their mouths connects us not only to a chemistry billions of years old, but to a truth about existence itself, that creation often begins where nothing seems possible. Darkness instead of light, crushing pressure instead of openness, heat fierce enough to dissolve, and yet, here life finds space. Maybe memory does too. What if we ourselves are drawn echoes of these vents, born of opposites, thriving in paradox? We breathe the gift of oxygen, yet hold within our blood iron once left in the oceans of shadow. We rise in the sunlight, yet keep deep within us the heat of Earth's molten past. Perhaps to live is always to balance between light and dark, between fragility and endurance, between what is seen and what is hidden. Entropy too plays its hand here, reshaping vents into ruins, covering them in sediment, sealing their stories until new cracks open elsewhere. Nothing is permanent, even at the bottom of the sea. Yet each collapse births new towers, new plumes, fresh chemistry, new opportunities for life to begin again. In this endless cycle we see the same rhythm that plays across all scales, the crumbling of mountains, the erasure of fossils, the rewriting of sky with every chemical breath. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of this place. Not silence, but a deep, volcanic whisper, a constant surge of water rushing, hissing, boiling in the dark. It is both violent and calm, steady as a heartbeat, endless as a tide. It is the planet murmuring to itself, and life, small and uncountable, listening carefully to every syllable. And yet, if life could bloom in cracks at the very bottom of the sea, if memory could root itself in fire and shadow, what transformations would come when oxygen finally reached the sky, when even the air itself awakened into something flammable, something alive with fire. And yet, if life could bloom in cracks at the bottom of the sea, if memory could be etched in darkness and heat, what transformations would arrive when the atmosphere itself began to change? For in time, the silent labor of microbes had filled more than oceans and stone. Their exhalations gathered beyond the waves, seeping upward into the sky, reshaping the very element we now call breath. At last, oxygen had tipped the balance, and in that moment, Earth was introduced to something entirely new: fire. It is almost impossible to imagine a planet without flame. To us, it feels eternal, as old as thunder. Yet for billions of years, lightning split the skies onto bare stone, igniting nothing at all. There was no fuel, no oxygen to burn. Flash after flash ended in silence. But with the slow patience of cyanobacteria building their layered cities in shallows, oxygen began to suffuse the air, not quickly, not in great rushes, but slowly, bead by bead, until one day the atmosphere itself was capable of carrying flame. Picture lightning striking a patch of drying microbial mat along some forgotten coast. For the first time, spark coincided with breath. Flame spread, not long, but long enough to leave its mark. What we call fire, consumption, release, transformation, entered the planet's story, and with it came a new way for matter to change. Geology records this not in burning forests, those had not yet come, but in subtle signatures left in minerals, oxidized traces, strange shifts in isotopes, quiet footprints of ignition written in stone. They tell us that by 2.5 billion years ago, oxygen had filled the atmosphere enough that fires could take hold wherever fuel allowed. The Great Oxidation Event, we call it, a phrase that feels too simple, too cold for such a transformation. In truth, it was a revolution spanning millions of years, the sky itself becoming flammable, alive with possibility. Think of what that meant to earlier life, the forms that had thrived in an oxygenless world. For them the gas was threat, poison, a corrosive tide. Whole microbial lineages vanished in the shift, dissolved into silence. Extinction was the price of breath. Yet with loss came new horizons. Oxygen opened the door to energy, unimaginably more efficient, to metabolisms capable of complexity, of larger bodies, of futures that would one day include us. Fire was not just destruction, it was threshold. There is metaphor here too, as there always is in science stretched across time. Fire, like memory, consumes and transforms. It does not preserve what it touches, but it leaves traces, new forms, ash that becomes soil, smoke that reshapes sky. Could it be that fire itself is one of Earth's ways of remembering, of transmuting what is into what will be? Every flame is both ending and beginning. Perhaps the first fire was also the first rehearsal for renewal. To close your eyes and imagine that moment is to imagine silence broken in a new way. Wind carrying not just heat but smoke, the elemental signature of combustion. For the first time in Earth's history, matter spoke through burning. The sky was not only background now, it participated, feeding flame, holding breath, altering what it touched. Life and air became entangled in ways they had never been before. And what of us, standing here billions of years later, tending flame not as chance, but as choice? Our campfires and furnaces, our torches and cities, all descend from that first moment when oxygen made ignition possible. Even now, every fire we light is a continuation of that ancient shift, a reminder that what seems ordinary is built on eons of unlikely labor. Perhaps that is why fire feels so strange to watch, so alive, so familiar, so hypnotic. It carries not just heat and light, but memory of a world that could not burn until oxygen said it could, memory of the sky itself learning to carry possibility. And yet, if fire could rewrite Earth's story so profoundly, born from the invisible exhalations of microbes, what other messages lie hidden, not in flame but in the isotopes themselves, the silent atoms locked inside minerals, carrying echoes of worlds we will never see? And yet, if fire could transform the very sky, if oxygen could alter the rhythm of the world, how else did the Earth learn to keep memory? Not in fossils yet, not in bones that had not been imagined, but in atoms themselves, in isotopes that still whisper stories we can hardly hear. For hidden in the ratios of carbon, sulfur and iron, are echoes of a world that came before us, records too small for the eye, yet vast enough to hold the planet's earliest secrets. An isotope is nothing more than a variation of an element, an atom wearing extra weight in its nucleus, and yet that weight matters. It is like an accent in a voice, a subtle inflection that reveals origin and journey. Rocks carry these accents still. To the geologist reading their lines, isotopes are like syllables in a hidden language, measured with precision, but interpreted with awe. Carbon, for example, tells us when life was eating, breathing, dividing, even before bodies could leave trace. A fraction more of the lighter isotope, carbon-12, in an ancient layer hints that microbes were alive there, choosing that atom over its heavier twin. To an untrained hand, the rock is mute, but to one who listens, it becomes testimony. I hosted life, I held breath, I carry echoes. Sulfur does the same, its isotopes shifting in the presence of oxygen, scattering into patterns that reveal when the sky first began to change. Each signature is not loud, not clear, not a picture we can hold, but together they form a chorus, faint but unbroken, carrying the sound of atmospheres 3 billion years lost. And iron too. Iron carries perhaps the deepest story. Dissolved in primordial oceans, it stained the waters red until oxygen forced it to settle, sinking to the seafloor in bands that still cross our landscapes today. These banded iron formations stretch for miles, black and rust in repeating stripes, each one the outcome of oxygen's silent rise, each one a page in the earliest record of breath. They are beautiful in their austerity, solemn like hymns pressed into stone. What does it mean to think of atoms as archivists, of isotopes as memory? Perhaps it reminds us that history does not exist only in photographs or ruins, but in the very shapes of matter itself. Time does not just pass, it imprints. Even as entropy erases, it leaves marks. We live surrounded by these scars, walking daily over chronicles more ancient than stars that glitter above us. There is something meditative in knowing that meaning resides in such subtle places, that silence itself speaks, if only you know how to listen. The isotopic ratios tell us of volcanic eruptions, of oceans once thicker with iron than with salt, of atmospheres that suffocated rather than sustained. They tell us of cycles long forgotten, of extinctions no eye ever saw. It is memory written not on parchments or tablets, but in the rhythmic spacing of neutrons in a nucleus. Could it be that the Earth itself dreams in isotopes? That its subconscious emerges in the distribution of atoms across stone, across ice, across every blade of grass? And if that is true, then perhaps we ourselves are dream fragments too. The carbon in our cells carries the same accents, the same signatures. In our bodies we hold isotopic whispers of ancient oceans, of vanished skies, of fires that never burned. What we imagine as separate, planet and person, past and present, are not separate at all, but echoes layered into echoes. The oxygen in our lungs, the iron moving in our blood, the carbon shaping our bones. These are not mere elements, but the memory of the world 3 billion years ago, alive inside us. Even without fossils, even without ruins, the Earth has found a way to remember itself, and we, unknowingly, have become its remembrance. And yet, if atoms themselves can serve as memory, if matter can whisper across billions of years, then what did those whispers witness during the long, unbroken reign of microbes, the true rulers of deep time, whose empires left no monuments except the atmosphere we now breathe? And yet, if isotopes carry the faintest memory of vanished worlds, they also remind us of who reigned in that silence. For in truth, the longest empire Earth has ever known was not built of stone, not carried in armies, and not recorded in monuments. It was microbial. For billions of years before forests spread, before shells calcified, before bones cast shadows across a surface world, Earth belonged to them alone. It is difficult, from our scale, to imagine such reign. We envision empires as vast walls, as inscriptions left in desert stone, as cities dusted into ruins. But the microbial empire had no walls, no streets, no flag. Its dominion was absolute, yet invisible. Oceans were its palaces, sediments its archives, shorelines its streets lined with colonies. For generation upon countless generation, cyanobacteria and archaea, anaerobes and their cousins, lived, divided, conquered, perished, without witness, without interruption. To think of it is to confront a scale of time that humbles every civilization we know. 3 billion years passed with microbes at the throne. They saw continents born and drowned again. They watched skies shift from copper haze to oxygen's unfolding blue. They shaped these transitions more than they were shaped by them. Not passive residents, but engineers of the planet, their metabolisms altering gases, minerals, even temperature. Through photosynthesis, through respiration, through strange metabolisms that consumed methane or sulfur, the microbial kingdoms kept rewriting the planet's atmosphere, again and again. Evidence of their reign remains, though never in statues or written words. It remains in stromatolites, in banded iron, in isotopic scars. Every one of these is their declaration. We were here, we transformed this world. Even now their dominance has never truly ended. From clouds drifting above us to the deepest layers of crust beneath, microbes persist in uncountable multitudes. The empire remains, no longer solitary, now shared with newcomers like us, but enduring still. Perhaps what astonishes most is that this reign was not short-lived preparation. It was not a prologue before true life began. It was the story itself. If history is measured in duration, then the microbial empire is the greatest history of all. Dinosaurs ruled for a blink, mere hundreds of millions of years. Humanity has existed only for a whisper, but microbes, in their endless resilience, have persisted for over 3 billion years, shaping every breath we take. There is a paradox here. We easily forget microbes, because they cannot be seen. Their empire exists below our threshold of perception, and so we treat it as secondary. But is that blindness, our own failing? Could it be that scale has deceived us, that greatness is not measured in height or spectacle but in endurance? Persistence itself is the truest monument, one not eroded by wind or toppled by time. Close your eyes and imagine this reign, not as cities, but as a rhythm, an ocean filled with invisible currents of life, rising and falling, blooming and withering, unnoticed. Perhaps it felt like silence, but it was not. It was abundance without form, influence without recognition. And within this vast anonymity, the foundations of every creature to come were laid. The chemistry of metabolism, the rules of inheritance, the exchange of energy, all rehearsed under their dominion. We call them simple, and yet everything complex descends from their empire. And are they truly gone? No. Even in us, they remain. In our guts, on our skin, within each breath, carried across invisible colonies drifting in the wind. Their lineage persists in mitochondria, cellular powers that were once free-living microbes, joined into partnership billions of years ago. We carry their empire in our very cells, every heartbeat a testimony to their endurance. Could it be that humanity itself is only the newest layer of this microbial reign, not its replacement? Humility returns here, as it always must. The great dynasties of kings and cities we speak of will vanish in time, leaving perhaps faint technofossils in their place. And still, when our monuments have crumbled, microbes will remain, as they always have, colonizing in silence, remembering nothing but the rhythm of division. Perhaps empires of humans build to be remembered. The microbial empires built never to be seen, and yet, they endure longer. Endurance, then, is another form of memory, one that requires neither eyes nor voices. And yet, if even empires leave no statues, no stone-built archives, then what do we make of the landscapes carved by something else entirely, by the press of glaciers, by the weight of ice shaping silence across continents? And yet, if microbial empires could thrive for billions of years, reigning through warmth and water, what becomes of the Earth when silence comes in the form of cold? For though we think of our planet's beginnings as forever hot, forever volcanic, there were times when the pendulum swung the other way, when ice slipped quietly across the continents, and even the oceans themselves grazed with frost. These glacial whispers, caught at the edge of ancient time, remind us that Earth's temperament has always been shifting, never still. Imagine it, a young world still wrapped in greenhouse gases, and yet somehow ice spreading into places it had no right to be. Forever we are reminded that balance is fragile, that warmth can falter, whether from the dimness of the early sun, or the drawdown of carbon into stone, or cycles written into orbital mechanics. The atmosphere bent toward winter, the ground fell silent beneath frozen sheets. Water, once abundant and restless, was locked away into great masses that pressed against the soft crust. These were not the towering glaciers of the last ice age, sculpting valleys we now walk. These were earlier, stranger ice events, some so extreme they may have wrapped the entire Earth in white. The theorized snowball Earths when the planet became a jewel of ice drifting in space. Even if not every ocean froze, the idea humbles us. Our home may once have been almost erased beneath silence, its seas sealed, its continents buried under sheets cold enough to silence sound. And what of life then? What of microbial empires accustomed to warmth and chemical abundance? They endured as they always do, hiding where ice could not reach, near volcanic vents, beneath glaciers, within briny pockets of seawater still liquid under pressure. They crouched in shadows, diminished but unbroken, teaching us again that persistence is not brightness, but patience. The planet may have worn the mask of silence, but beneath it, quiet rhythms continued. Geology holds memory of these frozen ages. Dropstones, foreign rocks carried by icebergs fell into ancient seas, embedding odd testimonies into silt. Striations on continental stone, grooves marked by the crawl of glaciers, whisper of massive sheets drifting across land. Isotopic ratios, once more, betray oxygen locked into ice, carbon drawn down to near-vanished levels. The stones speak once, silence froze the world, once even warmth could not hold. It is strange to think of ice not only as absence, but as a force of creation. For glaciers destroy, carving mountains, breaking continents, but they also sculpt. When they retreat, they leave valleys cradling lakes. They deposit dust and silt, enriched by what they've carried, feeding oceans, sparking blooms of new life. Even in erasure, there is planting. Perhaps ice, too, is a kind of writing, an engraving of time into the very bones of continents. And what of us, walking now in a warm interglacial, fearing the return of ice, as though it were only enemy? Might we see it differently through the lens of deep time, not simply as threat, but as rhythm, as another draft in Earth's endless story? To think this way is not comforting, but it is steadying. The planet is never fixed. Cold gives to warmth, warmth to cold. Empires, atmospheres, oceans, none endure without transformation. If memory has texture, then ice is its sharpest edge. It cuts, it leaves scars, it presses silence into the stone. And yet, from those scars, life returns, altered, renewed. Could it be that even silence, even stillness under white horizons, carries the promise of reawakening, that absence itself is part of creation? Close your eyes, and picture a frozen earth. Hear the groan of glaciers moving over stone. Slow as thought, feel the stars reflected in endless sheets of white ocean. Sense the weight of air thinner, crisper, almost hollow. This was no static death, but a chapter, a passage, a pause that reshaped everything that followed. And yet, if ice can so thoroughly erase, and still leave marks for us to find, what of the dust carried in its wake, sprinkled across land and sea, dust that would become another kind of archive, each grain a whisper of inheritance? And yet, if ice could grind stone to silence, then what of the fragments it left behind? Dust carried in winds, in waters, in the wake of glaciers retreating across continents. Dust that settled softly upon oceans and plains, layer by fine layer, like an invisible snowfall of memory. To walk across land now is to walk across these quiet inheritances. For every handful of soil, every grain beneath our fingernails, is a particle descended from storms far older than us. Dust is the smallest archive of all. It is not bold like mountains, not enduring like glaciers, not vast like oceans, and yet, it carries within it the chemistry of billions of years. From volcanoes, dust drifts laden with minerals flung high into the stratosphere. From deserts, it moves in veils across oceans, seeding faraway waters with iron, cobalt, phosphorus. From glaciers, it scatters across prairies, bringing fertility where otherwise there was none. Dust remembers journeys, always falling but never quite lost. In deep time, these particles built tapestries of inheritance across the planet. Sediments rich in their layers reveal stories of oceans rising and falling, of climates warming and cooling. Dust draws lines in ice cores, locked within bubbles that whisper of past atmospheres. Every particle is both tiny and infinite, a shard of memory too light to notice, yet strong enough to bear the weight of worlds. What is most astonishing is that dust links together what feels separate. A storm rising in the Sahara carries minerals across the Atlantic, feeding the Amazon basin with nutrients stripped from stone long ago. Without that equivalence of sand and forest, trees might falter. Life itself flourishes on such unseen inheritances. Perhaps our own bodies, our blood, our bones carry too the signatures of dust scattered before humankind existed. Could it be that every breath we take holds trace particles once part of deserts, volcanoes, glaciers gone for eons? Dust is also an instrument of climate. Suspended in air, it reflects sunlight, cools skies, shelters glaciers for longer seasons. Too little dust, and warming quickens. Too much, and the earth steels itself into cold. In this delicacy we see again the pattern that has no end. Balance, fragile balance, where even dust has the power to tip a planet's rhythm. And so, dust is not nothing. It is not absence. It is presence in its smallest voice. It does not rise loudly, but travels slowly, invisibly, reminding us that memory is often particle rather than monument. Just as isotopes spoke softly, just as microbial empires ruled in invisibility, dust too reminds us that the most enduring influence often lies in what goes unseen. Perhaps we should think of dust not as residue, but as inheritance. Every fragment split from stone carries the mineral ancestry of mountains now gone, volcanoes long collapsed, glaciers that withdrew before history began. To touch dust is to touch silence filtered fine. And in every particle lies an entry in the archive of Earth, one written not in grandeur but in repetition, grain after grain, drift after drift. Some traditions tell us we are made of dust, and geology would agree. The iron in our blood, the elements that compose our cells, the calcium within our bones, all were once part of stones weathered, broken, scattered. When we say ashes to ashes, dust to dust, we are not merely speaking of endings, we are speaking of return, of reunion to an archive we never truly left. We are speaking of continuity written in the smallest possible script. And yet, if even the tiniest dust can reshape oceans and forests, if grains themselves can preserve climates and whisper of vanished glacial ages, then what of the broader hand that guides all matter across time, the patient, inexhaustible hand of entropy, dismantling, scattering, writing memory anew through decay itself? And yet, if dust can carry memory in fragments, drifting across oceans as inheritance for forests and rivers, then what of the deeper principle behind it all? The reason dust exists at all, the reason mountains crumble, glaciers retreat, oceans dissolve stone. This principle has a name in science: entropy. It is the tendency of all systems toward disorder, toward scattering, toward release. But perhaps disorder is not the truest word. Perhaps a softer one is patience. For entropy does not act suddenly, with violence. It moves slowly, invisibly, with inevitability. It waits, and it does not stop. Entropy's hand is everywhere. Rocks weather into pebbles, pebbles into sand, sand into dust. Mountains, once jagged, grow rounded, their peaks carried away grain by grain into valleys that await them. Oceans take cliffs piece by piece, turning stone to sediment, sediment to shale, shale to memory buried beneath younger layers. Time itself assists entropy, carrying its work across eons. To look upon any surface of Earth, the smooth shore of a lake, the gentle arc of hills, is to see entropy's brushstrokes, artistry painted not in seconds but in aeons. And yet, destruction is not all it leaves. In breaking, entropy also creates. Without erosion, there would be no fertile soils, no nutrients carried to rivers, no layers of stone we now read like chapters. Entropy transforms order into diversity, singular peaks into plains feeding forests, whole continents into sediments filled with the isotopic whispers of vanished oceans. To call it disorder is perhaps to miss its deeper role. It is the invisible archivist, dismantling what is, but always leaving traces, fragments, echoes. What vanishes in form is reborn in distribution. Sometimes it feels frightening to confront the inevitability of erosion, of decay, of collapse. Our bodies too follow this path. Cells dividing imperfectly, breath thinning, time scattering us back into the elements. But perhaps here again, entropy is not cruel. It is simply continuity. We become soil not because we are erased, but because we are absorbed back into Earth's archive. We are reclaimed, repurposed for new patterns that rise after us. Think of the cliffs along an ancient coastline, marked by strata of millions of years. Each band is a memory of entropy's hand. A river carried one layer, a glacier, another, a desert wind, a third. What we see as permanence in those colors is only pause. Each layer is temporary, destined to fracture again, to be lifted, folded, erased, and rewritten. And yet, without these pauses, without entropy's patient scattering, there would be no record at all. Memory is created, not despite decay, but because of it. Scientists trace this patience even in the laws of physics. Energy dissipates, heat spreads, order dissolves into randomness, and yet every loss leaves behind a signature, a number, a mark that can be measured. In its quietest essence, entropy may simply be time itself, carving pathways between past and future, planting silence between their echoes. Could it be that the shape of forgetting is also the shape of remembering, both held in the same invisible current? And we, as part of Earth, carry entropy in us too. Our bones will soften back into minerals, our breath will return to the sky, the iron in our blood will scatter back into soils to be carried into rivers again. The molecules of our bodies are only borrowed, on loan, held briefly in arrangement before entropy recycles them into another form. Perhaps the comfort lies in realizing we are not lost, only rearranged. Right now, dust drifts across continents, ice melts into rivers, stones fracture beneath the weight of frost. Right now, entropy's hand is writing across the planet, as it has always done. We might imagine it as decay, But perhaps, more truthfully, it is the slow formation of new canvases, waiting for stories not yet told. Entropy levels, entropy scatters, entropy blends, but it never silences. It records in another language. The language of dissolution, the language of return. And yet, if entropy is everywhere, if all matter dissolves into echoes, then what does this say of Earth itself, this restless planet that seems, in its cycles and rhythms, almost like a dreaming mind, shaping, erasing, remembering in patterns we barely perceive? And yet, if entropy is everywhere, if every mountain and body and ocean will one day scatter into smaller echoes, then might the Earth itself be dreaming as it changes, not in the way we dream, with images and words, with memory and invention, but in deeper rhythms, in patterns of shifting stone, in the choreography of seas and skies. Perhaps the planet does not simply exist. Perhaps it remembers in cycles, and those cycles are its dreams. Consider tectonic drift, the continents wandering slowly, pulling apart, crashing together, assembling supercontinents like Pangaea, only to dissolve them again. To us it is geology, but to Earth could it be breath, inhalation and exhalation extended over hundreds of millions of years? Each collision raises mountains, only to let entropy lower them again. Each separation births oceans, only to see them consumed back into the mantle. Rhythms so vast they seem timeless. Perhaps these are dream cycles, looping motifs repeated across aeons, carrying within them the subconscious of a restless planet. We see the same rhythms written in climate, greenhouse warmth giving way to glacial hush, ice receding back into waves, waves evaporating back into sky, a pendulum swing between fire and frost, never settled, never final. To us it may feel like chaos, a planet without balance, but to Earth, perhaps this is balance itself. Balance found not in stillness but in change. To dream is not to remain fixed. It is to wander between images, between states, between possibilities. Earth, too, wanders. At its core, the planet is molten, alive with convection. We call it geology, a mantle shifting under our feet. But perhaps it is something more, the deep unconscious, a mind without neurons, thinking in waves of molten rock, dreaming in heat and pressure. The magnetic field we live within, its poles wandering, flipping, rearranging, is another murmur of this dream state, like synapses flickering across incomprehensible spans of time. The whole world hums, even when we do not notice. What if memory does not only belong to life? What if Earth itself dreams of its own past in cyclical rhythms, repeating what was, reshaping pieces into new forms? In this view, volcanic eruptions are not accidents but exhalations, earthquakes not mere breaks but pulses of an enduring dream. When we say mountains rise, we are watching dreams form in stone. When we say glaciers melt, we are watching old visions dissolve, so that new ones may be imagined across continents. And we, fragile and temporary, are part of these dreams too. Our bones are drawn from minerals pulled from oceans. Our breath is woven of gases released by microbes billions of years ago. Our very perceptions, sight, sound, memory, are carried on the architecture Earth's dreams have already built. When we sleep, we picture rivers, mountains, caves, skies. Even in our private dreaming, we borrow imagery from our greater parent, who dreamed them first. Perhaps this is what intimacy with the planet truly means, not dominion, not conquest, but recognition, that every step we take is inside a dream, not our own. Every breath we exhale is part of a rhythm older than lungs, older than life. We are dream fragments, brief shapes conjured out of Earth's patient cycles, and though we believe ourselves the dreamers, perhaps the planet is the one imagining us, briefly, as part of its long subconscious unfolding. Consider extinction. Entire lineages flicker and vanish. The trilobites once crawled across shallow seas, millions strong, now nothing but flattened fossils embedded in stone. Dinosaurs thundered for ages, only to dissolve into bone dust. Is this destruction? Or is it dream forgetting, the way visions fade when morning comes? If Earth dreams, it must also forget, leaving only fragments behind, stone layers, isotopes, dust, and from these fragments it dreams again, creating another scene, another cast of beings. Entropy, then, is not just the eraser, it is also the dream keeper, ensuring that each scene of Earth's unfolding dissolves into another, just as in our sleep one image melts into the next. Nothing is permanent, but nothing is truly gone either. All becomes part of the subconscious weave, threads picked up centuries, millennia, or millions of years later in another form. And maybe this explains something deeper. The echo we feel when we stand before vast canyons or watch waves scatter endlessly against stone. The awe is not merely beauty, it is recognition, the quiet sense that we are hearing part of a dream we belong to, that our memories are not only personal but planetary. Perhaps that is why silence in geology feels so vast. Silence in stone can carry more weight than words ever could, because it is charged with the subconscious of a world that dreams in forms, not language. We walk through those forms every day, rarely seeing them for what they are, not mere landscapes, but thoughts carved in rock, imaginings pressed into valley floors, eroded into cliffs, crystallized in mountains of quartz. And yet, if Earth itself is dreaming, if we are but small thoughts inside that planetary subconscious, what forgotten civilizations, what vanished possibilities might also exist as part of that dream, lives erased so thoroughly, we only sense them in hints, in speculative shadows, in whispers of civilizations that may have come and gone before we ever imagined the possibility. And yet, if Earth itself can dream, if landscapes and oceans are parts of its subconscious cycle, then what do we make of the possibility that some dreams may have already been forgotten? We think of history as beginning with us. But what if it did not? What if the Earth once carried other civilizations, other patterns of life, as complex as our own, erased so thoroughly that even the word fossil fails to apply? Might there be shadows of forgotten societies hidden inside the geologic record, civilizations erased not by fire or conquest, but by time itself? It seems impossible, and yet, the silences of deep time invite the question. Fossils of soft-bodied microbes escaped memory for nearly 3 billion years. Countless lineages vanished without trace, leaving no bones, only isotopic hints in stone. If entire kingdoms of biology could vanish, why not too the fragile inventions of intelligence, grass huts, wooden canoes, even early metallurgy? Should they have existed tens or hundreds of millions of years before us? Time erases more thoroughly than fire. Entropy leaves only fragments. A civilization could rise and fade, and with each cycle of subduction, of flood, of volcanic rewriting, their footprint could be unwoven. Geologists suggest it takes only a few million years for almost all surface traces of human civilization today to vanish, crushed back into the mantle or eroded into sediment. Skyscrapers collapse, glass weathers, steel returns to rust, plastics dissolve or are carried into sands. In tens of millions of years, perhaps only subtle chemical fingerprints remain, unusual concentrations of carbon, plastic fragments becoming microstrata, isotopic signatures of our fuel-burning age. If that is our fate, then why presume we are the first? Could other ages of Earth have left technofossils too subtle for us to recognize, scattered amid the bands of iron, mistaken for natural anomalies? This is the Silurian hypothesis. Some scientists carefully pose the thought experiment of whether industrial civilizations could exist in the geologic record, and if they did, whether we would ever find them. The unsettling answer is that evidence might be nearly invisible. Heat, erosion, subduction, and time would erase nearly everything, as they have already erased so many oceans, mountains, and skies. Life itself may well have dreamed further than we believe. Speculation is not certainty, but in the stillness of deep time, wonder emerges. Could there have been minds shaped differently from our own organisms, that built not with stone, but with materials long decomposed? Tools perhaps crafted from organics too delicate to remain. Could there have been civilizations in ice ages long forgotten, or in greenhouse worlds before the continents had even settled into their modern shapes? If every empire we know leaves ruins only for a handful of millennia before fading, then entire ages could be folded away, irretrievable, except through faint anomalies in the chemistry of stone. And yet, even these anomalies whisper possibility. Layers rich in unexplained carbon spikes, sudden heating events frozen in isotope ratios, odd deposits of metals and plastics we call technofossils. Do these marks whisper only of climate shifts, volcanism, meteor impacts? Or could some be the faded footprints of intelligence, erased so well that certainty will never come? Science approaches carefully, never proclaiming, only asking. But the question itself lingers, echoing across our imagination. There is something haunting about this. Something both melancholy and consoling. If civilizations have risen and fallen before, then we ourselves are not alone in history. We are participants in an older rhythm of memory and forgetting. If none have, if we are the first, then responsibility deepens to recognize how fragile our record is, how easily we too could vanish into silence. Either way, humility is demanded. We are temporary no matter how solid we believe ourselves to be. Speculation of lost civilizations is less about answers than perspective. It reminds us that silence in the fossil record is not proof of absence. Silence is only silence. If soft-bodied life endured unseen, if entire atmospheric transformations occurred only to be recorded in isotopes, then what does absence mean at all? Is it emptiness? Or is it memory we do not yet know how to read? Close your eyes and picture it. The ruins of a civilization millions of years older than us. Softened into sand, pressed into stone, ground into dust. Nothing remains but altered chemistry, slightly skewed isotope ratios, unusual heat signatures in minerals. They are not legible to the eye. They are only whispers, faint shadows of what may have been. And yet, if so much can be lost, if entire civilizations might leave only shadows behind, then what of us? What does the future Earth inherit from our presence? And what messages will our own dust carry into ages beyond imagining, when other beings might wonder the same about us? And yet, if entire civilizations might have risen and dissolved into nothing but isotopic hints and subtle chemical scars, then what of us? What traces will we leave behind in the stones, in the oceans, in the air that will one day be rewritten again? To glimpse our own future, we need only look backward, at what vanished, what persisted, what remains after 3 billion years of silence. The past paints the future, but always with a brush dipped in forgetting. Consider concrete. Consider steel. Consider vast fields of glass and plastic. They seem unshakable, yet already entropy touches them. Cities crumble the moment maintenance falters. Roads fracture under frost. Skyscrapers rust from within. Give 10,000 years, and nearly all collapses back into rivers and dust. Give 1,000,000, and entire landscapes of humanity may be no more than faint residue in sediments, strata indistinguishable from ancient riverbeds. A curious geologist millions of years from now may find only a spike of carbon dioxide, a thin layer of microplastics bound into rocks, a smear of rare metals redistributed unnaturally across their core. We may not leave ruins, they too dissolve, but we will leave chemical shadows. This is the paradox of our age. We believe ourselves architects of permanence, yet we know permanence is illusion. Mountains, oceans, atmospheres, none have endured unchanged, and neither shall we. Our technofossils may whisper of us long after we are gone, but they will not rebuild our stories. The isotopic traces of our industry will remain as evidence of activity, not meaning. Whoever or whatever comes after will interpret those whispers as best they can, much as we now interpret banded iron and stromatolites, unsure whether we read them fully or only incompletely. It is sobering to think of ourselves as only another layer. Perhaps the Anthropocene, our self-proclaimed epoch, is not a monument at all, but simply a thin page in a geologic journal that has already stretched for billions of years. A page that can be folded shut, a layer pressed between older layers, not a crown, but a whisper, not presence, but memory. And yet, there is also wonder in this. To recognize our impermanence is to recognize our kinship with everything. We rise and fall as mountains do. We breathe and return to dust as rivers do. We light fires, and the sky we fill carries those flames forward as oxygen once altered it from silence. We share a destiny with the entire planet's matter, reshaping and being reshaped, always carried forward into another form. To imagine the future of Earth painted backwards through its past is not to despair, but to feel humility, to see ourselves as less apart, more embraced. Speculation lingers. What if Earth paints us so thoroughly into itself that we cannot distinguish where our inventions end and geology begins? Already plastics form new mineral-like composites in shorelines. Already concrete erodes into sediment with chemical patterns alien to any previous age. Future geologists may not see cities at all. They may see strange rocks, new formations birthed from human hands, but indistinguishable from natural mineral deposits. To them, we may not look like a people. We may look like a brief surge of new geology, punctuating the slow lines of stone. Perhaps this is how Earth dreams of us, not as rulers of the planet, not as protagonists of history, but as a chemical pulse, an alteration of isotopes, a flicker of heat recorded in stone. We may see tragedy in this, but there is also continuity. We are not outside Earth, but within it. When we vanish, we do not leave nothing, we leave transformation. Close your eyes and imagine millions of years hence. continents in new arrangements, shorelines erased, oceans shifted, no trace of human monuments, yet in a layer of stone, faint residues of carbon, particles of fused plastic, enrichments of nitrogen drifting in isotopic ratios, subtle signals that once there was a time of combustion, of light, of language, no faces, but echoes, no stories but patterns, no immortal monuments, but whispers that Earth itself chose to keep. And yet, if this much can be seen in reverse, if we can read our own future in the past, what finally becomes of memory itself? Does time preserve, or does it erase until nothing remains but silence, heavy and complete? What is the true shape of forgetting? And yet, if the past paints the future in whispers, if all that remains of us may be only isotopic traces and muted shadows pressed into stone, then what is the true shape of forgetting? We think of memory as a preservation, a holding on, but forgetting too has form. It is not emptiness, not absence, but a kind of sculptor working as patiently as erosion on stone. Over time, forgetting does not erase everything. It leaves outlines, fragments, strange bones of meaning that are never whole. The earth forgets in layers. Oceans subduct crust into mantle, rewriting the surface as though tearing out pages from a book. Forests rise, burn, vanish, regrow, their histories scattered into charcoal fragments. Glaciers grind valleys smooth, pressing silence over whatever came before. And yet, always something remains. A ghost in an isotope, a pattern in mineral veins, a band of rust locked in stone. Forgetting is incomplete. It is porous. It holds holes as much as it holds records. We forget as individuals too. Memories dissolve, faces fade, moments drift into blurred impressions, but not because they are gone. They return in dreams, in gestures we cannot place, in emotions without names. Forgetting is like geology. It dismantles, it softens, it combines scattered fragments into something else. We no longer remember every moment of childhood, and yet we carry it in us, folded into posture, into thought, into the very rhythm of language. The body remembers long after the mind has let go. Could it be that forgetting is just another way of remembering, diffuse, invisible, but no less powerful? The planet seems to practice this same pattern. Whole ages erased, and yet not completely. Forgetting leaves behind fossilized shadows of stromatolites, isotopic echoes, dust sleeping under ice. What has vanished is not banished, it has only been transmuted, embedded as background music beneath newer layers of song. Perhaps forgetting is not an enemy of memory, but its partner. Without forgetting, there can be no newness, no space for transformation. Just as entropy scatters, creating room for new order, forgetting dissolves detail to reveal essence. Out of the blurred landscapes of the past, distinct moments surface like ridges in stone, rare but enduring. A single stromatolite, a single iron band, carrying the trace of billions that vanished unrecorded. In memory we seek detail. In forgetting, we receive continuity. What then is the shape of forgetting? It is circular, like the return of oceans. It is layered, like sediment. It is uneven, erasing some moments fully, preserving others inexplicably. And in this, it may resemble the dreaming of Earth itself, a movement between presence and absence, between form and dissolution, between what is carried forward and what is set aside. Close your eyes and imagine the forgotten world of 3 billion years ago. Skies tinted copper, oceans dense with iron, microbial mats carpeting shorelines. You are imagining through forgetting, for you do not see it as it was, you see through abstractions, through fragments left in stone, through reconstructions blurred by silence. And yet, even this imperfect picture is memory. Forgetting has not destroyed it fully. It has reshaped it into wonder, into curiosity, into the haunting beauty of what can only be guessed. Could it be that forgetting is how the universe keeps itself infinite? That details are surrendered so new forms can arise? That life itself is possible only because forgetting clears the way? If every microbe, every thought, every event were perfectly preserved, the earth would be so crowded with memory it could never move. Forgetting is not failure, it is the hidden engine of change. And perhaps that is why we find peace in forgetting as much as in remembering. To forget is to release, to allow ourselves to be carried back into the larger cycles we belong to. Just as dust drifts, just as stone erodes, so too do we dissolve, all held gently in time's endless patience. And yet, if forgetting has shape, if memory hides within silence, then what does it mean for us? Could it be that we ourselves are nothing but echoes assembled from what the earth once forgot? And if so, what echoes of us will become part of the dream, when we too are folded into its silence? And yet, if forgetting has a shape, if memory is carried in dust and stone, if even silence is its own archive, then what does that make of us? For we are not separate from these echoes, we are made of them. Every breath we take, every cell sustained in the quiet currents of our blood, carries the inheritance of Earth's longest memory. In us, echoes have assembled into something that can speak, something that can remember that remembering itself exists. The iron in our blood was not born here, but forged in ancient stars, scattered across galaxies, collapsed in dust before ever settling into the mantle beneath our feet. The oxygen in our breath was woven by microbial empires 3 billion years ago, patient architects who layered stone as they freed the sky to transform. The calcium in our bones was long prepared by oceans dissolving rock, carried into shells that rose and fell as reefs, ground down again into sediment before becoming us. There is nothing in us that has not been borrowed, handed down, repurposed from chapters invisible. To breathe deeply, then, is to inhale silence that has been shaped into air by lives that never had voices. To walk is to press our weight upon continents built from volcanic fires long cooled, their memory folded into every step. To think is to assemble sparks through chemistry older than language, maturations of molecules, rehearsed in black vents hidden at ocean's bed. We are not apart from echoes, we are echoes that have become aware of themselves. Perhaps this is why awe humbles us in the presence of mountains, rivers, oceans without horizon. They are not scenery, they are the memory of what dreamt us, what sustained us before we could even imagine existence. To stand before them is to meet our own reflection, stretched across geologic time rather than the narrow span of years. And yet these echoes do not repeat perfectly. They blur, they scatter, they recombine. That is their power. Memory is not preservation, memory is transformation. The stromatolite that fossilized in stone did not pass on its name, but it passed on its gift: oxygen, atmosphere, potential. The trilobite that vanished left only its imprint, yet its lineage gave birth to creatures that still crawl and swim today. Each echo distorts as it travels forward, and yet in distortion, meaning continues. Could it be that this is what we are too, distorted echoes, unfaithful but alive, carrying forward more of the past than we can ever know consciously? Entropy ensures there are no eternal monuments. Every city, every tower, every human work will dissolve, but it also ensures that nothing is wasted. Our collapse is only rearrangement. Our residue, our technofossils, our chemical signatures will seep into the next chapter. We may not recognize ourselves in their form, but we will be there. The echo cannot help but travel onward. This does not diminish us. It makes us vast, for to realize that we are echoes is to realize we belong to something endless. Our stories may fade, our languages may vanish, our names dissolve into air, but the matter, the rhythm, the patterns of us will be recast in ways we cannot see. We are not only the sum of what the present remembers, we are part of the ongoing dream. Imagine closing your eyes beneath tonight's sky. The stars you see are not the stars of today, but their light as it was thousands or millions of years ago. Even starlight is echo. Even the night itself is layered with forgotten pasts. We live surrounded, not by immediacy, but by delay, memory reaching us across time. Is it any wonder, then, that we too live as echoes, brief carriers of an earth that never ceases to speak, even when so much of its voice is silence? There is peace in this thought. To be an echo is not to be less real. It is to be part of continuity. It is to be sewn into the fabric that never stops unfolding, even as threads unravel and are woven again. Our finite lives are not separate from infinite time. They are expressions within it. Songs composed of vanished notes, briefly played, then carried on in other forms. And yet, as we reflect on this, as we allow the truth of echoes to soften the weight of impermanence, another thought emerges. Perhaps we are not only made from echoes, perhaps we are becoming echoes ourselves. With every breath, every trace we leave in air, soil, stone, the future will not remember our fullness, but it will remember our imprint, however faint. What we exhale, what we build, what we scatter, these will become the whispers that shape epochs far beyond us. So when we breathe deeply, we might imagine breathing not just for ourselves, but for the countless before us, whose whispers became air. And when we exhale, we might imagine that exhalation drifting forward, perhaps shaping the chemistry of someone or something yet unborn. Memory, in its truest form, is not ours to hold, it is ours to pass along. Our time here is brief, but nothing in us is brief when taken in the context of 3 billion years. We belong to those oceans of iron, those skies of copper haze, those microbial cities, those glaciers grinding silence into valleys, those layers of dust, every chapter now written in us. We are memory condensed into heartbeats, into perception, into the fragile awareness that for a moment, Earth is looking back on its own history through our eyes. And so, when echoes become us, we understand at last we are not the conclusion of Earth's story, but part of its ongoing meditation, another passage in the dream, destined to dissolve and yet never entirely disappear. For even when silence comes, even when forgetting spreads across what we have done, some whisper will remain, and that whisper will become another, and another, until the echoes themselves write the next becoming.